Thank you ever so much for inviting us. It's a great honor to be here. My name is Chris. I write about sanctions in particular in the context of Russia. One of the things I thought would be useful to run through today quite briefly is a few simple things about sanctions and how to think about them in particular. And there are things I think it raises for business and things that business leaders should think about in the context of sanctions. The first really big thing I want to stress is that sanctions are not going to go away. There's not a universe in which sanctions and export controls are going to disappear. The world in which that happens is one in which not only does the current ongoing conflict in Ukraine freeze or stop in some way, it's one where Russia has started resiling from its hostile stance, one where it started pulling back from territory it seized. It's very difficult to envisage a world in which Europe in particular removes a lot of these strictures. And I know that's something that business leaders are often anxious about. Sanctions are a policy that's popular with policymakers in part because they come without a direct fiscal cost. So they are a way of having a conflict with a foreign country in a way that doesn't come directly out of the exchequer. They can pass on lots of these costs to businesses, and that is also obviously why businesses dislike sanctions. There's a use of the private sector against another country. But it's also important to understand that a reason they're not going to go away is they have very big consequences and big effects. And it's very easy to be doomery about sanctions. And lots of the stories that people like me write lead business leaders in particular to think, well, these things don't work. Even if there is an unfreezing with Russia, even if there isn't a proper unfreezing with Russia, maybe we should be getting rid of these things because all we're doing is impoverishing ourselves. But sanctions really do work in lots of ways. I'm just going to quickly run you through some of these. A classic sort of sanctions story that you've probably read and know about is a story which goes, before the war, Russia only bought X amount of something. After the war, they bought a lot more. And this is purchases of machine tool cutting heads by Russia from China. And I think a traditional way of thinking about that as a thing is, well, look, we can't control what China does. They are able to buy this stuff. They're buying lots of it. Sanctions aren't working. And similarly, if we look at the volumes they're buying too, this is the weight of machine tool cutting heads, very important, critical tool required for the war effort. Similarly, you see this big surge after the war, and it's very easy to continually come back and think, well, the sanctions aren't having an effect. They're still able to get what they want. Chinese suppliers are still supplying it. But I'd invite you to take my first graph and divide it by the second graph. This is the price per kilo of cutting tools. What sanctions are doing is two things here. They are forcing Russia to go to one supplier. They can't buy this stuff from anyone else anymore. That's one of the reasons why the Chinese sales are up. And they are paying through the nose. So the Chinese are absolutely ripping them off at every turn. So they've gone from under $10 a kilo before the war, around 10, probably an average of around $8 a kilo, to at points over $40 a kilo. And these are homogeneous goods we can weigh by the kilo, basically. That's one of the reasons I've chosen this as a thing. So what we are seeing when we see lots of these surges in Russian spending is often not just that they're getting volumes, is that they are being ripped off by their suppliers because sanctions are forcing them into a narrow channel where they have few options. Similarly, Mike, you're going to be hearing from my colleague Max in a moment. We've written about complicated structures the Russians have built to evade sanctions. So in this particular case, it's about a Russian, we think, SVR officer who built a network that channeled microchips into Russia, which were critical for the war effort. They bought them in France. They were shipped via an Irish company. They moved to an apparently civilian Russian company and then were passed on to Russia's main electronic warfare supplier. And again, it's very easy to read these stories and think, well, these don't work. These sanctions policies aren't working. Export controls have holes in them. We can't do enough to hold back the tide. But actually, I'm going to invite you to learn a little bit about the man here who we introduced. This is the officer at the center of it. So he is a civil servant, right? He works for an intelligence agency. This is a picture of him from his holiday, taken by a professional photographer who he hired to come skiing with him. This is his wife on a holiday in Western Europe. You may be interested to know, Viber. This is their flat, which was featured in a house and design magazine. These people are living really, really well. So one of the side effects is that we are creating opportunities for corruption inside Russia that are diminishing their ability to wage the war to. I would much rather they're spending money on this guy's flat than buying efficiently from Western suppliers to wage the war. We talked a lot. I'm not going to Elena Rybakova, you'll be hearing from in a moment, is a greater authority than me on this. Again, we talk a lot about the challenges of how the oil restrictions haven't yet managed to do enough to combat Russia's ability to raise revenue. The grey bars here are the shadow fleet, basically the share of crude oil shipped via the shadow fleet each month. You can see that where it gets basically all grey, that's when the oil price is high, and therefore basically Western companies can't get involved. When the oil price drips down a bit, they come back. So you can look at this and think, well, the problem with the dark fleet is clearly that they've built themselves an insurance policy. So when the oil price is low, they can use Western companies. When the oil price is high, they can effectively use their own controlled vessels. But again, one of the slightly surprising things that we discovered in the last 18 months is that if you sanction an individual vessel, not the company that owns it, but literally the number painted on the side, if you put that on a sanctions list, people don't want to go near it and don't want to touch it. And it massively reduces the effectiveness of the shadow fleet. So I did this using OFAC, so US sanctions, but it actually works for other countries too. This is the average amount of oil shipped by shadow fleet vessels in the 6 months before sanctioning, and then this is what happens in the 6 months afterwards. And you can see that at the moment of sanctioning, the amount of oil that these vessels can move suddenly just drops. They become much less effective, and it's because Indian buyers, Chinese buyers suddenly think, your name is on the name painted on the side of your ship is on this sanctions listing, and so I know there is no way I can pretend I didn't know that you were sanctioned, and the prices that the Russians are able to charge will drop, the cost of transporting will drop. Sanctions can be enormous. These ships are much less effective and much less lucrative for the Russian treasury. So again, you shouldn't be despairing about it. I think there's a question about what a Latvian company should think about this, right? So I mean, there are obvious things that all Latvians should think about, given your neighborhood, but there are some specific Latvia-specific issues. So the first one is obviously related to your border. Latvia and Lithuania in particular both crop up a lot when we look at sanctions evasion. So we're used to seeing logistics operations in Latvia and Lithuania being named in cross-border traffic. And quite often what the Russians will do is they will effectively put the name of the Latvian or Lithuanian company on the form, partly to disguise who the real supplier and real buyer is. So they are, in some senses, it's because there are people in Latvia and Lithuania who are willing to take that risk and willing to be that middleman and be that party. And the real, if you like, the real economic operator is somewhere else. The pictures at the graph at the right there is of luxury cars being imported basically through Latvia largely. This is a slightly older graph, it's come down since. And that picture at right is a German car still in Germany when the photograph is taken, and still in Germany when the advert is placed on a Russian website, which effectively, if you bought it in Russia, someone would drive it through Latvia and Belarus to come into Moscow. There are these cottage industries here, but I think it's important to stress this isn't just about a few fool guys here and there. This isn't just about little artisanal entrepreneurial sanctions busters. This is the people, you might probably quite used to seeing these graphs. The dark blue line is the flow of goods from Latvia to your near neighbor Kazakhstan, which is obviously a trade route that you would obviously honestly and earnestly want to pursue so nearby, which obviously took off at the beginning of the war. So this is a story about people lying to Latvian customs officers about where things are going, and pretending they're going to Kazakhstan, going over the border, and then them going into Russia. The light blue line is the Kazakh declaration of imports from Latvia. So the gap between those two lines tells you basically about goods that have gone missing in transit. And these numbers are very big. I mean, this is, you can see as a share of these trade flows, the amount of missing trade is very big. And I think we have to think of this as these are serious professional operations that are running this stuff. There is good news. If we only look at goods that are regarded as basically war-related, there was a spike, there is a gap between the two lines that grows, but then actually it's quite closed up quite well. So customs officers have got much better at spotting things that are obviously not just going through. But to go back to that first graph, there is a structural problem here. There is a... So it's declared as Latvian origin, but it might just be going through Latvia. So there is a problem there. So that's a sort of structural problem. What I would stress for if I were thinking about investing at the moment and plotting through business at the moment, one of the things I think you have to assume is that compliance is about to get a lot harder. So a consequence of all of the action that's been taken, including the successful action to squeeze the flow of war-related goods, has been that Russia has got much more sophisticated at creating counter sanctions measures. So we've written recently about payment structures that the Russians have built. So this is a graph showing you the volumes of money being moved through a crypto operation based in Kyrgyzstan. This is only a small portion of it that we can see that's run through crypto. But we're talking about billions of dollars a month of alternative payment structures that they're building. And this is really, really important. This feels like it might be quite distant, but it's really important for businesses to think about for two big reasons. Because what they're doing is they're building an alternative payment structure that means that it will be easier for them to move money into third-party jurisdictions. And that has two really big consequences. The first is it leads to an effective rise in Russian spending power. So they've got an option now of buying in Singapore or Malaysia or whatever, when they only could go to China before. Then all of a sudden they have more options and more capacity. They have more suppliers they can go to. They have more choice. They have better buying power. The second thing is, for companies, this is going to become more of a nightmare. So what would have been reasonable for us to ask a company to do to check that the end buyer wasn't Russian may have been, we want to check that you've got like an end user certificate for this good. We want to check that one or two steps down the chain isn't a Russian guy. We now have to go further, right? You now have to assume that making sanctions work is going to require going 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. It might, previously we talked a lot about goods going through Kazakhstan, through Turkey, through these other jurisdictions. The number of at-risk jurisdictions is going to grow, and the ability of businesses to say, well, this guy is in Germany, like why, how is this, why should I be worried, is going to diminish. You have to assume that their ability to circumvent and disguise their presence is going to get better. So I think if I were in your shoes at this point, I'd be thinking a lot more about my investment in compliance. And actually, if I were thinking of investing, compliance as a service is a thing that the universe needs to think about, and Latvia in particular needs to think about, because at the end of the day, someone needs to get things over the border. And that's always going to mean more Latvians than British people. Anyway. I think we should keep an eye on these graphs. This is the same one as before. This is how we're going to be able to spot this stuff going on. It's going to be where unexplained goods going missing, unexplained things not turning up where they think they're going to be. So I think you should expect to see more of these things, and we should care a lot about them. the test of the sanctions regime and the export control regime is going to be not necessarily things turning up that we see. It's going to be things going missing in graphs like this. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, and now we're ready to commence with the next panel, and we have a bunch of beautiful and wonderful speakers ready for us. But before we do so, a little bit of context. So the second part of today is sanctions and security. What do they mean for Latvian company leaders? As global sanction regimes intensify in response to geopolitical tensions, businesses face growing pressure to adapt their strategies and operations. For Latvian company leaders, compliance is only the starting point. Sanctions are reshaping risk assessments, investment decisions, supply chains, and even market access. This discussion will explore how sanctions are a security and foreign policy tool and how they affect the business environment in Latvia. What challenges and opportunities they create, and how companies can remain resilient, competitive, and responsible in an increasingly regulated and unpredictable world that we're living in. And as for the speakers, let's invite them one by one. So we have Elena Rybakova, non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Whichever chair you find suitable. Give her a round of applause so that at least the start is happy. Raimons Zukuls, director of the National Customs Board. Jānis Garisons, Chief Executive Officer of NEWT 21 or NEWT 21, whichever you prefer. And Artis Pabriks, Director of the Northern Europe Policy Center. And yet again, we have a wonderful moderator who will be looking over how the discussion is going and addressing your questions as well. Max Sedon, Moscow Bureau Chief at Financial Times.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Chris as well for situating what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion here, where we have a panel who can really look at this issue from all sides, from the perspective of government, business, and then the real broader picture. And I think it's very interesting to be looking at the sanctions issue in the Latvian and Baltic context, because when we speak about the idea of a frontline state, we're usually thinking about a military threat over the border from Russia, but this is a war in Ukraine that isn't only against Ukraine in the way that the Russians have cast it, and it's not only happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. I think we saw very much from Chris's presentation that Latvia is a frontline state in the sense that it has a border with Russia that has been vulnerable as part of the sanctions evasion routes. It is the Latvian coastline, among others, that the Russian sanctions fleet is sometimes sailing past. So it's a very relevant topic, I think, to Latvian economics and security. Almost 4 years into this horrible war. So Elena, I'd like to start with you. You were part of a brilliant team at the Kyiv School of Economics Institute who recently published some really groundbreaking, I think, reports into the Russian military-industrial complex, and you've testified in Congress in the United States about how much Western companies are still helping fuel the Russian war machine with all these components. Why are we even having this conversation? It's almost 4 years into the war. Everyone knows that this is an enormous problem, and it seems like Western governments and Western companies are still really an essential part of the Russian war machine that is directed against the Western world. Why is this still a problem?
Well, I will be very frank here, right? Because it is not an existentialist threat to a company somewhere in the middle of the United States. It is an existentialist threat for many of us here in Latvia. And I've been saying that for the last 3-4 years, and people said, oh, you're exaggerating. Well, we have closures of airports even in Munich. I mean, we're clearly no longer exaggerating. And also, as Chris wonderfully pointed out before, sanctions work. Just let's say one thing. If sanctions didn't work, like Russian propaganda has has been pushing forward for the last 3-4 years, why is it that the first thing that they ask from the Americans to remove sanctions? So we have Dmitriev immediately running up to Dubai and then to Washington and meeting up with friends, and this is the only thing that they're asking for. And they have prepared wonderful, it's been leaked, it's a very thick document where Ministry of Economy with others have put together, and they've put, this is the executive order, this is that, this is Congress, this is this is the effect on our industry, this is the effect on, they've invested a lot of time. Sanctions do work, right? So this is their first ask that they have, can you lift sanctions? So that's one, sanctions work. The second one, it is an existentialist threat. And as again, you, Max, and Chris have written a lot about, there is data. God bless Russian corruption, there is data. You should, there is, yes, there is GDP numbers, and they're probably manipulated. They said, well, don't be silly, right? Don't look at the headline numbers saying, this is the correct number, right? Or don't say that, look, this is the wrong number, I'm not going to look at any Russian data. Now, as you work in business, none of these approaches work, right? Dig deeper. And the data is available, and we do know that they're producing weapons of the quantity and the type that is no longer needed in Ukraine. So they're investing in weapons that are for example, maritime warfare. The Black Sea war is for now over because Ukrainians have been very effective, right? Well, where they might be using that, right? So that's why we need to think about sanctions. And I'm a macroeconomist. Unfortunately, I've moved much more into defense just because we don't have a choice anymore. It's not that we can live in some parallel reality where this is not happening. It is happening, and the better we're prepared as companies and as government officials, as policy think tanks, the better we will be able to ensure prosperity of our countries, because that's in the end of the day what all of us want. And the reason, just now, very quickly on why it's still happening for European or for American companies, well, because it makes business sense. I'm sorry. For them, if they don't have enforcement, they don't want to invest. And if I'm never going to be caught as a company, and all my my competitors or other companies are still pursuing business with Russia just via 4 or 5 different parties, I'm missing out. They're sending all these components to Russia. They're sending the critical machinery to Russia. I'm not. I'm losing money. And if my fine for non-compliance with export controls is couple of $100,000 for a company like Intel, it's nothing. So I just put it somewhere as provisions. I multiply it with the probability of being caught, which is also not very high, and I sit there pretty. And then I also have some legal advisors who will tell me, well, actually, the guidelines from the BIS, which is the Institution for Export Controls, are just guidelines. They're not legally binding. Well, and then I'm doing even better. And what we do see from the data is that for anything marginally sophisticated, Russia needs external shipments. So if you look, for example, at how they're sort of shipping between their military plants domestically, there are a lot of raw materials, obviously, they have, and you see a lot of those shipments. The moment you see something marginally more sophisticated, it tends to come from the border ports, the border stations, border ports, or border sort of transportation hubs, oftentimes from China. When it comes from China, again, as colleagues here pointed out, doesn't mean it's made in China. A lot of it is actually transshipment, or maybe it's made in China on license or joint venture enterprise or products like that. So what can we do going forward from both sides? Government and corporate sector have to work together. We're not going to solve it, either one of us, right? So on the government side, I think it's critical to be clear, to harmonize among countries as much as possible. Because if it's clear, it's easier to comply with, right? And from the corporate side is the corporate responsibility. We talked for many years about ESG and other things. It is all very important, but at the moment we're having a critical issue of having a war, so it's not just about making money. Nobody's going to be making money if we have this, more and more disturbance coming from Russia. So I'll stop here and we can discuss it more.
Well, and I'd like to go to Artis, please. You've had experience at dealing with this issue back when you were in government. We are on the verge of passing the 19th sanctions package in the EU. That would imply that European governments are still aware of this issue, yet we're still having this conversation and still talking about various exemptions that keep holding up sanctions, whether it's, right now it's Raiffeisen Bank, as we've reported, or Hungarian energy purchases. Why does Europe seem to not always have the political will to really tackle this problem once and for all?
Thank you for the question. Well, first, just for audience, I'm here having two hats. I represent my think tank, Northern Europe Policy Center, but I'm also CEO of Latvian military and drone industry. So I have one leg also in the business. But answering your question, look, money makes world go around. It's number one. And if we look to sanctions, we can say that they work. And at the same time, we can also say that they do not work, because it is frequently a question not only black and white, but also of, let's say, the level of efficiency. And if you look politically towards views among different world countries towards Russian aggression against Ukraine, we can see that the Western narrative is, first of all, not shared by everybody. We can see that there are countries like China, Iran, of course, North Korea, and basically we can see also a number of countries, starting with India and other countries, which are simply don't see this from that perspective as we would see in Poland, Baltic states, Finland, or even Europe. And then once we come to Europe and these 19 packages, I would say that politically, perception of threat among European partners is very different. Also, political ambitions at home are very different. And I still remember now, in the last days again, famous former Chancellor Merkel saying that Nord Stream, this is purely business project. It has no whatsoever influence on politics and something else. I mean,
and I'm sure you saw what she said the other day in this interview in Hungary.
I also gave an interview
to
Deutsche Welle about that, what I mean about this, because anyway, let's leave Merkel. I think she... I think
my Hungarian's a bit rusty.
I think Merkel simply went into the path of Schröderization. But what I would like to say about sanctions, look, once we implement these sanctions, we must understand that we cannot win war with the sanctions. It's additional element what we can strengthen or weaken. That's number one. Number two, once we enter into sanctions, a lot of European governments, including even my government, they're always looking, okay, how much these sanctions will hurt me? And then we start with different items which we take out. For instance, Baltic countries like Latvia, we do not buy any kind of oil, gas, or from Russia. But if you look to the European approach, we can see that they are ready to get away from Russian gas and oil only in 2027. So listen, guys, it's still 2 years of war. We are sponsoring 30% of Russian budget by buying gas and oil. Of course, if we could say no to Russian gas, obviously also other countries can do this as well. But it will influence domestic politics. It will influence voting and elections. And we see what is happening now in electoral process in France and in Germany. AfD is the number one party. In France, Le Pen is going on. And it's not because of Russia, but the problem political is also that one of the gravest issues which many mainstream European politicians were not tackling at home, migration, goes now hand in hand frequently with attitude also towards Russia. And we here, the countries which border Russia, we are really stressed to the end by this, because it's not that we do not understand what Russians want. We need to persuade our allies, if we implement these sanctions, then let's follow up also to the implementation of these sanctions and not just avoid them whenever we can. So this is the largest problem. So one thing is adopt, another thing is really to follow up. And again, I would like to finish, business is business, sanctions are sanctions, but sanctions are additional point. It's not the point with what we win the war. And we have to win this war, and we have to remind from day to day that it's important that this war is won.
Thank you very much. Now, Raimund, I'd like to go to you because as we saw from that graph that Chris was kind enough to show us twice, because I think we've been making versions of this graph for 3 years now at the FT, and I think it's a very important one to show Latvia's difficult situation in the sanctions context. You're really dealing with this every day, as we saw from the graph. Things are definitely getting better, but there's still more work to be done. Can you tell us about your experience there, and what are the biggest issues that you encounter when you're trying to solve this problem?
Yeah, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, I would like actually to address our closest partner, and it's the business community. We work with them every day, and I believe that sanctions was a great change in everyday business routine for all the companies, and not only with those companies, for those companies who are working with Russia and Belarus, but also for those who are maybe have some deals with Central Asia, and graphs show it. For customs, it also was a huge change of daily routine. For very, very many years, what customs here to do your work quicker. Trade facilitation, things like that, and export of European Union, and please be quick, and it's very important. It gives money to the state budget and to the European Union budget. And now in one day it changed from more quick to more careful. Take your time if you need some, if you have to do some checks and things like that. And of course, nowadays, I believe everybody understands that trade with Russia or Belarus, and I also really would like to stress Belarus, because very often we forget this part. It's a high-risk area to trade with these countries, and you have to be prepared to do that. Of course, which is allowed, that allowed. There are no fully closed border or things like that. And in fact, I think that obeying sanctions and complying with sanctions, it's some kind of also of investments from companies. Why? Because if there, I don't know, some escalation or escalation of war or things like that, maybe we can even speak about that. It's a huge danger for your businesses. It's not like only for customs or only for government some problem, but also for everyday life of actually humans. And sanctions, of course, are no longer something in the background. And I will not speak maybe with those about those who intentionally break some rules. It's another story. And I believe that customs is quite clear about that. We are very strict about some intentional things, but there are still a lot of companies who may be doing some irregularities or because of lack of information, I don't know, all other things except criminal things. And in that case, of course, we like customs, we can help if it's necessary, and we also see our purpose in a way of prevention of sanctions. Yeah. What else? Maybe about little bit about statistics. What's going on border, on our eastern border? More or less 80% of all exports that we are closing are not started in Latvia. Yeah, it's another European Union countries, but it's okay. It's not like a problem because, of course, we have external border, and a lot of countries do not have it. But still, from all this big percentage, also quite a big percent of violation of sanctions goes to not in Latvia started exports. Actually, it's 73 last year, quite a huge amount of violations that we find out started maybe somewhere else. What can I suggest to companies? I can suggest that sanction checks at your site, it's not like legal formalities. It's actually part of business risk management nowadays. Why? Because even if it's not intentional, the possible punishment or possible financial losses are quite big for companies. And just please be careful, check it one more time, consult with customs if it's needed. For exporters, I can say that please be responsible for the end user. For importers, I can say please be sure about the region of goods, where it comes, and for those who are dealing in a transit area, please take a look at the routes, take a look at the payments and things like that. last thing that I would like to say, maybe in this short introduction, we cannot afford the weak border. We cannot afford it. If there is maybe two options, if we want to keep the border open, it have to be strong. It have to be strong. There have to be strong customs control. And yes, I also agree with previous speakers that yes, sanctions will not win the war, but it can really weaken Russia and Belarus. And what we really see is that in very many discussions, one of the first questions that they ask, please reduce the level of sanctions, please take them away. And we as customs, we are understand our mission in that. Yes, it's our influence, how we can influence situation. Yeah, it's sure. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Jens, I'd like to turn to you. You've also been on both sides of the aisle, but I think you can give us a really interesting business perspective here because businesses such as the one that you're involved in are really in a tricky position here because you are part of many of these same supply chains that we see that you are in effect sometimes competing with Russia for the same components and yet you are dealing in this sort of environment where you might be forgiven for feeling that you're almost being punished for taking all the steps to do the right thing while the Russians are doing all the wrong things and creating these smuggling networks and getting away with it, essentially. So what does it look like from your perspective?
Yes, it looks a little bit different, of course, and I wouldn't say I compete with Russia, but I think we're competing with the European producers and of components compete with the producers of outside world. And I think that is where I would say lies our problem as European Union, because then it's about competitiveness. And I think you pointed out it very well, that actually what we're doing now, I would use probably the famous quote from Latvian movie Car with, in the color of Midsummer Night, the papers are in order. Paper in order, and that is our problem, because we putting more and more burden on the companies, and especially on the small companies. And we basically, I think, killing the small business with the all bureaucracy, what actually we putting on, with all compliance and everything. And especially in Latvia, we have very, let's say, friendly banks who probably already can, some of them, can take as a model customs and state revenue service, because you can get consultancy there and preventive actions. In banks, you will not get anything. They, I think, already, far away in compliance, and they don't think about business at all. But that is a problem. You as a small and drone producer, you have enormous network of the partners, because you have to get a lot of components, and then you can choose between producer and European Union, who will ask you list of compliances and fulfill papers, and then you can get producer, for example, in Korea, who will serve you immediately, and who will offer you price as half of that. And then you can, and then I ask, are we as European Union intend to compete in the market, or we simply want to do something, and but Soviet Union did it, and where we ended with that. I think that's the compliance, basically, and that is the strange thing. In Latvia, we know, rumors are everywhere, and we know the rumors who is actually supplying whom, and who actually exporting to Russia. And that's, as you rightly said, those are big companies who are using. And everybody knows. And then my question, sorry for a very probably straight talk, but you are putting enormous burden on small companies who never heard about Russia. Probably how many companies nowadays export to Russia? Not many. And then this segment is, I think, can be controlled very easily. We have AI nowadays, everything we can use probably to exert those who are exporting. But instead of that, addressing the problem, we putting burden on whole companies. And the funniest thing, lately I heard my partner company was asked to prove that they sales to another European country will not go to Russia afterwards. Really? That's why I selling to European Union have to prove something. No, that company, if it will sell something to outside European, that it has to prove. But what I try to say, the burden what is put on the companies, especially small, it's too heavy, and it's not yielding any results.
And unreasonable.
And that, I think, is the problem of, again, putting more on companies, more regimes. But the problem is probably you have intelligence, you have everything, you have AI at the end, which can, accumulate a lot of data. And you can address those companies, and probably the question is whether you want to address those companies who really export them.
So what would be the first thing that you'd want to see changed to make this
I
more
think
competitive?
that is a target that should become more targeted, because that specific segment, what is who export or who supplies. If Ukrainians show us drone, everybody's seen the components in that. Any questions? Just you have to figure out, using intelligence methods, to figure out how it gets there.
So in the way that, for example, in the last year and a half, the Biden administration, they became much more surgical and precise with their financial sanctions and how they were targeting Russian financial flows. You'd like to see the same done on components, and then that would in turn make it easier to lessen the regulatory burden on companies like yours.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the.
Yeah.
And how would that look in practice? Do you think do you think this is possible given the various regimes, and what you've described, what we've heard is it's just even within the European Union there is a it sounds like there's a two-speed process, if not even a 27-speed process of what kind of end user checks are in place and how they're actually enforced. So would that be possible, and what kind of steps would your agency be able to do to try to make that easiar?
Very shortly. If I'm comparing the number of companies who are exporting to Russia and Belarus from Latvia, year 2021, more than 1,000 approximately. Last figures, 180, something like that. We can see a significant drop of that. Yes, you are right. The drones that were shot down, last drone in Ukraine, full of Western parts and so, but it's a very complicated question because, of course, I really believe it's not going via our border or things like that. But, of course, the board is big, and there are a lot of countries via whom you can export from European Union. And if you are a huge company, it's quite okay that you have, 3,000 recipients of your goods, or even maybe more. And maybe from all these thousands, a couple of them are connected with somebody who are selling over to next one, to next one, and to next one. What we found out on the border, very rarely there are direct shipments. Direct shipments, I don't know, of some components. I really do not saw the microschemes that is loaded into the truck and sent over the border. But most probably, yes, there are other countries, Turkey, India, Emirates, and so on. Via these countries, there are also not the one company who are bad company in this country and exporting to Russia. There can be a network. One company selling to another one, and all these sales are legal until somebody brings these goods to Russia. That's the problem, and I can say that it's not easy. I agree, intelligence have to work. Maybe with some other methods that we don't have on administrative level, maybe with some criminal cases and things like that, but it's another story.
Elena, do you want to jump in here? I know you've looked at this issue really across, the whole supply chain, starting all the way in, say, Austin, Texas, with Texas Instruments, and ending with the drones that we find on the battlefield in Ukraine. Do you think the kind of steps that we've heard about here that would make it harder for Russia and easier on companies who are doing the right thing? Do you think that that's something that can be easily done in this environment?
So very quickly with statistics, over 70% of components comes from the US, and about 90% transactions somehow touched China. Maybe the company registered in Hong Kong or shipped. You've also done wonderful. I think you did go and knock somewhere in Turkey. I forgot where you did go and knock on
It wasn't me, but we did.
Yes, on the door. So this is the statistics. So what is the power of Latvia? The power of Latvia is to punch above its waist in a sense of policy making. So we have fantastic Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have, our representatives in various European institutions, and we need to use that effectively because we're trying to squeeze out here the remaining, 10% of non-compliance, but the problem is really elsewhere. The US, unfortunately, is busy with other things, and we see at the BIS, at the Department of Commerce, which is responsible for export controls, they've pretty much slacked the activity on all export controls. They're doing something a little bit on cartels, they're doing something Venezuela, they're doing maybe on China, but actually on China they're not really effectively doing. They're talking a lot, but actually not doing. They already were understaffed to begin with, and now these people are not, those even who are staffed, they're not really doing, they're not getting instruction from the political level to do anything, and some of them are also leaving. And now of course we have the shutdown, right? So the US has removed itself from the leadership in this area, which then puts it on us. Also, in Congress, if before congressional committees were calling these companies and, it was like, televised and they were putting pressure and saying, look, what is your compliance? When did you do the last time? For example, big company, clear question. Have you done due diligence of your distribution networks? No, we haven't. We can commit to do it next year. So for a company like, huge electronics company, they basically are forced to say that, oh, well, next year maybe. And then they tell stories about the washing machines and about toothbrushes that you can use for ballistic missile. I mean, imagine what it will do in your mouth if you use one of those rogue toothbrushes. Clearly, it is BS, right? So unfortunately, it leaves us in European Union and Latvia to push through our business organizations and also through our policy organizations to have a more unified approach at the European Union level and potentially think very seriously about secondary sanctions. I know we in Europe don't like them because Americans can use it on us, but as Raimunds, I think, was saying, follow the money in the end of the day. So we might actually have to go this way and think about secondary sanctions. And in terms of the sanctions and Russia, sometimes good fences make for good neighbors, and the fact that, and the fact that we, as an economist, the fact that I buy insurance against the flood, I'm not going to cause the flood. Maybe foreign policy people will say something else, but it's healthy to buy insurance and stick with it.
Yeah, Artis, I'd like to bring you back in here because it's almost like if I were Latvian, that's almost quite a bleak picture that you've painted, where America is abdicating the leading position, and China is too big and too powerful for a small country like Latvia to meaningfully impact. Do you agree with that kind of? With that outlook, or do you think that there are ways where in a country like Latvia, with the government, with the businesses, they can still do more to have the outsized impact that we often see the Baltic states having on policy on Russia?
Well, yeah. That's a very difficult question, actually, because of course, small country has limited powers, and every country has limited powers in this case. But I would say we have to start with ourselves, at least as we usually think in our region. Number one, we must understand that no matter of the outcome of this war, Russia will continue to be our danger. That's very clear. So for our businesses, I think we must assume the strategy that, sorry, but we forget about the business across the border to the east. We simply forget about this. Maybe one day something nice will happen, but let's not put our money on that. And if some business still wants to figure out and plan something in Russia, then sorry, this is on your own expense and risk. That's number one. Number two, of course, as I mentioned in my previous speech, it's very clear what Russia wants. The problem is that we have to really deal with our allies from day to day. And by dealing with them, we should show them example, number one. But number two, I very much agree with Jan, is what he told, that sometimes we are putting on our businesses and our startups, for instance, and for instance in military industry, most of the companies are startups. We are putting burdens, and sometimes these burdens are not even governmental burdens, but some institutional, either from one bank or another bank, or somebody simply invents this, which is, first of all, killing our business. Secondly, it is not giving any impact on the goals we have to reach, let's say sanctions on Russia. And thirdly, it is simply unwise to do this. It's unreasonable, okay? So I think we should concentrate on the big stuff, and at the same time here in this country, we should do anything we can to promote our own secure supply chains and businesses which can assist our economy and our security, while not using components and imports from countries which in the times of war can turn against us or stop it. So imagine the drone industry, which here is relying on components of Russian allies. I mean, we cannot wage a war if Russia will invade. And then, of course, the third step is really try to deal with our partners. I mean, we have been, for instance, sorry for mentioning second time Chancellor Merkel, but we have been opposing Nord Stream for years. Of course, they did not listen to us. We have been also suggesting different type of Russian policies in European Union. Just imagine, in 2021, what Merkel mentioned as a time when she wanted to solve the problems with Moscow and avoid the invasion in Ukraine, there were documents in European Union circulating about strategic compass. And in this strategic compass draft, page 8, I remember personally because I'm responsible that this was changed. There was an paragraph telling that we share the same values and political perspective between European Union and Russia. 2021, summer. That's for the European Union proposal in those days. Imagine the thinking. So until we will not change this approach and way how we think about war, peace, collaboration, and actually values, somehow in the last year since Russia attacked Ukraine, I somehow do not hear very much anymore talks about shared values in European Union. They somewhere evaporated. When I was a minister and we joined European Union, then everybody were reminding us behind and on front, up and down, this is our European values, you have to comply. Now I want to see these values in work, once we speak also about sanctions or stopping the Russian aggression. And I don't see it.
Well, and I think also you mentioned the drone industry, and obviously we have a lot of expertise here about those. Something that you really see, from my perspective, covering the war, is just how far the Russians have progressed in less than 4 years. And you see this on the battlefield, and you also see this in the world of supply chains. And I will let you in on a little trade secret we have at the Financial Times. Some of these people that we write about running these smuggling networks, like Maxim, their tradecraft is not very good, which is a large part of why we were able to find them. Those pictures are from his wife's Instagram, which is still public, in the public domain. It was not difficult to find. And when you see, other people working on, the same teams who are better at their jobs, you not only see that they have better OPSEC, but the more things that we find, the better that they get, and the harder it is for us or for researchers like Alina to get the data. And I'd be, curious. Honestly, hear what you think. Do you see that same kind of urgency to really adapt, from a regulatory perspective and from a public-private partnership perspective? Do you see that evolving in the same way, with the same urgency in Europe as the Russians are very clearly treating it with?
No, I don't see. they, for me, would the first signal would be that European navies would start operating in my case, naval drones. If the aerial drones probably got already somewhere, everybody knows now that actually it's something. But as we've seen in Poland, when we have to address the problem, we still don't know. But I think with the drones, you raised one important issue. There's why drones are so, let's say, attractive. Because they are cheap. They are cheap, and they have to be in time, and they have to be progressed permanently. And as we put the most those administrative burdens on production, on supply chain, everything, we as producer can't actually compete anymore because we have to fill in papers. And again, it's easy to get, as I said, components from Korea, from Taiwan, as to get components from Europe. Which is, I think, nonsense, because you shouldn't. At the end, we're limiting our industry. That's for sure. And therefore, I would say there are components which are available on the market, and you can do the cheap ones from China, and you can get, and Russians are getting there, and you can get more probably advanced, but probably the same, but much more expensive, from Europe or from the United States. And I think that is, again, what I said, the question is how to be more risk-oriented, not just, across the board implement everything and put all possible as normal bureaucracy works, Byzantic bureaucracy. That's, but address the problem. And the problem is actually where we have to control the technologies what we have better as outside the world. That for sure. But for rest, if it's the same, why we have to control? Because I will go for cheaper.
Raviz, I think I need to ask you to respond to some of the criticism we've heard about the compliance regimes and the red tape. Do you think that there's as you said earlier, the businesses should be more proactive in sorting these issues out, or do you think that there's more that the government and your agency in particular could be doing?
I didn't hear that there's a problem with customs.
No, I didn't criticize that.
It's okay. But yeah, of course, from point of view of customs, we really switch. If you are dealing with Russia and Belarus, it means more controls and more strict approach from our side. But don't forget, for example, Central Asia. Yes, there are also violation and circumvention of sanctions if you are going to those countries, but still there is a lot of legitimate business with these countries. And from our point of view, it's not easy. It's not easy how to divide, how to compare, but I believe that we are also learning. I actually want to put out one more thing. We spoke about battlefield goods and what we can do, for example, to make the situation better. One good example, at the beginning of the war, battlefield goods can be brought via transit, via Russia. It was crazy. And we suggested, and thanks our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and then other specialists, at the end of the day, it came, I'm not sure, maybe with sanction package number 10, that all battlefield goods are not allowed to bring in transit via Russia. Another example, at the beginning, there were different sanctions for Russia and Belarus. Sorry, but I see those countries like one partner. And what does it mean? That there was everything that went to Belarus ended up in Russia if they wanted that. Yeah. But thanks God, again, this is solved now. Yes, maybe all government institutions we want them to be more quicker and so, but also we have this legal pressure that we cannot just, I think that it is and I will act. I need some legal background to that, and I need regulations, I need new packages and things like that. For customs, of course, it's more easier if it's said more clearly in regulations. We will do it. As I said, we see it like our mission, and still, of course, there is way to improve some things. Europe is not like very, very on one page, every country, we also know that, but still I see a lot of progresses and how things are done. And as I said, customs is not a problem for drone industry.
No.
So we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. I'd like to turn the floor over to questions. Do we have any questions? Yes, a gentleman over here. And there's a microphone. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Avi Sahar. I'm a CEO of a Tel Aviv-based Austin startup. I have a quick question. Your statements were very insightful about how to block Russian supply chains. Are you aware of a reciprocal effort from Russia's side to block European supply chains? And I'm referring to, again, I deal with Austin. The other week, there was a similar conference in Genoa, Italy, where the majority of dock workers' union met and coordinated an organized response against the Rearm EU program. This is something that is happening now. It's beyond politics. Is this something that you see affecting EU policy, or do you see this is something that EU politicians will be willing to oppose, even though technically it's not attacking Russia, it's attacking organizations from within?
Anyone want to? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I might try. Look, we as a small country, just like Israel, we are used to thinking in asymmetric way. Russia does the same. And they have very, very deep roots in Western societies, NGOs, media, parties, politicians, banks, everywhere.
I was trying to be diplomatic.
No, it's very...
aligned with Russia.
Yes, and that would mean, don't make a mistake. Look, I mean, we are living, I would even not call it anymore a hybrid war. We can discuss with Yanis or somebody else how we define it. But it's definitely not peace. It's kind of not traditional war. We are not used to. And they will use this asymmetric approach under very briefly, shortly under the Article 5 and 4, and they will disrupt. And what is their goal? I mean, if you are looking from asymmetric perspective, if you cannot win, you make your opponent weaker. How do you make your opponent weaker? You fragmentate it, you polarize it, you get, people in decision-making positions or in media or in influence groups, the ones who are supporting your cause. This is what we see all over Europe. And I don't want to take here, to another direction, but sorry, I mean, looking also to the Middle East and how Greta Thunberg is working. I didn't see her in Kiev. So I think this is very dangerous stuff which is going on regarding, for instance, sanctions and shadow fleet. I mean, the ship which Finns finally took was released last week, and according to courts, they will even pay some kind of fine to this crew. Isn't that a madness, actually? We know that they committed a crime. They know that they are under the influence of Russian special, let's say, operations, and we let them do it, we let them leave it, just because we say that we are run by the justice or law structures and system, which was maybe created 40 years ago, when nobody could imagine what is hybrid war, when everybody were living according to the idea of Fukuyama, that the war is won. It's craziness, We are shooting in both our legs, and I was last week in Germany. Drones are flying over the airport. What is the German reaction? They ask, are you ready for this? So they look, yes, we can call policeman. Policeman will come with his handgun, look at it, and make a report. So this is a readiness in the 4th year of war. So, and I would give this a message also to the Latvian security, also internal security. If you would have a drone over Riga airport, and if you will not be capable to take it out, your head should flow. That should be now the situation.
I think
be very
it's fair to
careful.
say on this topic, sometimes you get the impression, if you think about why Russia might, be stepping up, sending these drones and other disruptions. And Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia, he said something I think that does accurately reflect a lot of their thinking the other day, which is, how long have the Ukrainian drones been disrupting Russian air travel? This is our way of bringing the war home to you, but it doesn't seem like it is. I could say living in Germany a lot of the time, And Alina, you want to jump on that?
Can I just jump in very quickly? I mean, I think it's very useful to go and look at the active measures that the Soviet Union was doing and just revise all those notebooks, because they're much deeper and more sophisticated. For example, we do much less work on this topic, but for example, you can have a Ukrainian nationalistic think tank or sort of organization, which in the end will be sponsored by Russia. So talking about polarization, I think one has to be also very careful. When you hear somebody really going extreme one way or the other, it's sort of, you don't have to always think, oh, this is pro-Russian think tank. No. Also think on the other side, what is happening there. Or there's also been a story where they will do a Ukrainian think tank that they will sort of group that was like, Ukraine needs more funding from the US, and the measure there was to do so annoying for the US that there was, and so ungrateful that you support this message that there was in the Oval Office. Oh, you didn't say thank you. So to amplify that kind of, so it's much more sophisticated than it has been. And unfortunately, in the sanctions space, we sort of left them the space. I still have a lot of people who are saying, well, but Germany, or recently I had a question, US suffered more from sanctions than Russia. I'm like, there isn't even in macroeconomic numbers that the US has suffered, like kind of people, it's beyond 0 point of something GDP, right? But the message is still very prevalent. So I think that is very tricky. But then on the other hand, we do have a plus if you work much more closely with Ukrainians, because, they do intercept the drones. They don't bring up F-35s and F-16s to shoot a drone, right? So they've been unfortunate. And Russia is sending 600, per day sometimes, which was like what we used to be per month, just in autumn, right? Previous autumn, right? So they've learned a lot of these things. The production cycle, and I'm stepping out a little bit out of macro, but there's just a few months, and you can do sort of checks and innovation. So for us to be able to be that hub, an intellectual innovation hub that we can use for civilian and for the military production, there are many issues why, for example, in Ukraine there may be some issues. I'm not going to discuss it here, but the limitations on exports, or maybe some issues why companies register or do not register in Ukraine. We can do that here in cooperation with them, learn, but at the same time also give them a platform to be able to apply for safe funding in European Union, and also to keep on pressing for more integration, because at the moment it seems that they know what to do. Russians and Chinese and North Koreans are also not being stupid. They're showing up in the battlefield. Why? Partially because Russia doesn't have enough. But actually, that's another mystery, or sort of misconception. Russia has a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, they have, but nobody talks about the fact that if you look at their generational violin, they actually don't have enough people in the military age males. They have an employment of 2%. Why? Because they don't have enough people. But we don't really talk about it much in the press. So there is much more that we can do.
Yes, I think we do it with Ukrainians, actually. They bring us back lessons learned, and we implement them because they're using our drones. But actually, you took words of my mouth about Soviet playbook. We see this, and that's actually, we saw it during the Cold War, and it was normal. But I think the problem now, we introduce the term hybrid warfare, and it's always finds excuse not to do anything, because it's not hybrid. It's basically war is first stage of normal war, because once they fail in the first stage, there will be normal war. And we introduce hybrid, and we now, and it gives us excuse not to do it. And that comes back to the businesses. If you're not declaring that it's normal state of war, which we have to basically be aware, then why businesses would care? Why?
All right. Do we have any more questions? Anyone would like to ask a question? We don't have one, so I'm going to go to back to Raimons, who raised, I think, an interesting issue I'd like to hear more about, which is the issue of Belarus. As we saw on the chart, that was a big problem. As you said, it took 2 years to merge the Russia and Belarus sanctions regimes. But right now, we appear to be seeing attempts by the U.S. to break them apart again. We've already seen some relaxations of measures against Belarus, specifically on aviation, after some of these prisoner releases. How worried are you that Belarus could sort of come back as an independent actor in this space, and what kind of problems would that if we stop treating Belarus as the same as Russia?
I maybe will jump to the problems. If they, let's say, if we take away, from example, sanction regime from Belarus, it's the same that we take a sanction regime away from Russia. That's it. It's simple like that, and we have to understand that. And if somebody will not understand that, it's or he is not very clever, or he is lying. One or another thing. It's a really big red line. That's it.
Can I just very quickly, I mean, there are two, and you've written a lot about it. There are two industries in Russia that suffered the most. There is Gazprom, an industry, and also there is airline industry. So, and in between Russia and Belarus, there is no border. It's like trying to say, I'm going to remove on Daugavpils, but not on Riga. I mean, there is not even statistics to be able to check it. There is not even corruption statistics to be able to check it, right? So, so that's why I think, and people who do suggest removing the sanctions, I think they are aware very well of this issue. And I think it is purposeful. I think it's probably Russians coming and saying that, look, our industry is suffering. Can you find a roundabout way so that Europeans don't scream too much to help us out?
Do you, I mean, I know that we don't have the full data sets on Russia to really make these judgments, but we saw just in the last couple days, yesterday there was this very pessimistic statement by someone from Rosaviatsia, the Russian aviation regulator, saying that by 2030 that a large percentage, 30% I think, of the civilian fleet will just be inoperable because of sanctions. And a few days earlier, someone from the Russian machine tool operator industry was also talking about this. Do you get a sense that even if we don't necessarily see the results immediately on the battlefield, that these sanctions, and particularly the more precise sanctions targeting specific industries like those two, that they are working, and it would be a mistake to back down, just as it seems like there's been some success?
A fantastic moderation. You bring exactly the point that I forgot to mention, but we are at the inflection point for Russia. And the people are very happy now. All growth is slowing down. They're going to have no growth for the rest of the year. Well, if this is the time we show signals of normalization, it allows them to invest more cheaper. So they've hit the point where sometime last year, the technocratic bloc said, look, we are not producing more tanks, they're just getting more expensive. So let us sort of tone down a little bit the spending, we increase interest rates, and we slow down the economy. So the fact that the economy is slowing down is by design, because they're not idiots. They are not going to do Iran, North Korea, where they're going to shoot themselves in the head. Their macroeconomic management bloc is very thoughtful, and Putin, in all his speeches and messages, is very much behind them. So the thinking that, oh, that's going to disconnect, it's not disconnecting, at least for the moment, because they remember the lessons of '98, and they know the fastest way out of the office is via macroeconomic instability. So that they know very well. So by design, the economy is slowing down. What happens if we show signals of normalization? Well, people domestically who have some money, they will say, wait a second, I can invest a little bit more now. It's okay, maybe I'm not going to get hit. People in the third countries will say, okay, maybe I can also invest some money there, or maybe I can do sanctions evasions because Americans are not coming with the secondary sanctions with me. It doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a rush of money of IKEAs and whatnot coming back to Russia. That is also nonsense. But, this kind of gray areas, that will unlock the pockets of investment, and it allows Russia to improve their position and to be able to produce more tanks, among other things. And I think that's why we have to be very careful. And that's why also Russians are coming up now and looking for sanctions relief or some sort of messages or Alaska meetings because they know, because they need to reinvent the wheel. They need to invest more because otherwise they're just stalling. And you're right, sanctions are working, but it's not that we can say, oh, okay, they're working, in 3 years from now it's going to be this. If this just stays stale, in 3 years actually it's not going to be potentially just a little bit better, which is enough for them to do more. And why am I saying saying also about production of tanks is because if you look at the Russian industry, nothing really has grown much from the beginning of the 2022, apart from military-related industries. And that's what it is, you know, like, so it's not that I'm inventing that, it's for the good word. No, if you look at statistics, at their own even statistics, that's what they're showing. And that the military is beginning to plateau from the beginning of this year, and that's it. But everything else is sort of flatline. It's, that's Person Pulse.
I think we're running out of time. So Yanis, I'd like to go to you for final thoughts. You know, just what, if we are at this inflection point for Russia, what is, you know, the one thing, just quickly, that you think that Latvia and European countries could be doing so that industries like yours actually get to a point where they really are being more competitive, and we're seeing that it's companies like yours that are really making the difference on the battlefield and not just Russian ones?
Yes, I think that's how we can get competitive, reducing price and of course reducing lead time, producing more and in bigger quantities. And that you can achieve basically probably reducing the burden, administrative burden on small companies, especially startups, but also addressing those sanctions probably more, let's say, ping-ponging with risk management. It's easy to basically identify those components and those spare parts what Russia actually getting, and then let's deal with that, because I can draw the profile of companies who would probably export to Russia. That's, or through whom would go, and that's they, like, let's say, risk oriented, and the policy what is needed, and probably secondary sanctions. That's, but let's say help the local business. That's not to hurt it.
What helped a little bit at the BAS, the regulation which said that companies can report on other companies.
Yes.
And give feedback, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but give feedback, because you know best what's happening, right? And it's not fair that somebody is competing unfairly.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's important not to report to, let's say, to the
It's confidential,
big
obviously.
companies board. Which actually, what happens if you report to the big company somewhere in, I will not name the country, they would ask the auditors, locals, who would simply audit the local distributors, who probably have their own way of, and the big company even probably would not know, because everything happens in-house, let's say.
Okay, I would honestly love to keep going, but I think we are now out of time. So I'd like to ask you to thank our great panel once again for what I think was a very interesting and wide-ranging discussion, and certainly a lot for you to discuss over lunch now as to where Latvia, Europe, and private industry can go further on this issue. So thank you very much, and we'll see you at lunch.
Yeah, so,